Welcome to Lesson 2 of Know Your Supplies. This is going to be Acrylics Part 2, Mediums and Substrates. First, I want to start by talking about something I forgot to discuss in last month's lesson, where we went over the different classes of acrylic paint. That is the effect of paint changing color a bit when it dries. It actually usually gets darker a little bit when it dries. The poorer the quality of your paint, the more profound this change is. That said, it happens even in the best quality acrylic paints to some degree. It's simply a characteristic of the medium, the acrylic medium, and that you need to learn to account for. So I recommend making swatches and playing with any new paints a bit to get used to how much the colors change as they dry before you jump in and start using a new paint in an important project. I've painted some swatches of craft, student, and artist grade paint earlier, and these have dried, so you can see the difference. Now I'm going to add a second swatch of the paints wet so you can see the difference. So I'll start my acrylic paint color. Here it is. Cherry Cobbler. I've used red tones because they tend to show this pretty strongly. Okay, first the craft paint and Cherry Cobbler. Okay, that one actually on the camera looks like it's darker when it's wet, but it's not. If you here in the regular light, this definitely has darker tones, even though the way the camera's picking it up. Let's see. Because this is dry. Okay, let's do the middle one, which is the student grade. Or this is just a Van Groove studio grade. Oops. Too much on my palette there. We'll use more in a minute. And this is a little closer. Let's see. I think you can see the difference. There we go. When I tilt it that way, you can see. There we go. You can see that the wet ones are darker. There. Let me do the artist grade. See. Oops. I'm using Golden Liquid Acrylics, Pyro Red for that one. See there, so you can see the difference. And even though this is the highest grade paint, it actually is the most distinct one. Okay, so that's really just something you need to practice with and learn about. With acrylics. Now we can move on to some substrates used for acrylics. Get the paint off my fingers here, so don't make a huge mess. Now we can move on to substrates and uses for acrylic paint. Mainly I want to show you some different ways that acrylic can perform and how to prepare your surfaces for different effects and what substrates work well with acrylics. Of course, craft paints. Get a couple here. Let's move this one out of the way so it can dry. Craft paints. can be used to paint craft projects like plaster figures and wooden boxes. I'm not going to go into too much detail on craft uses since our focus here is more in mixed media and fine art. But when painting a craft project, some good general practices include using a base coat before adding the main color and sealing the work when you are done. For shiny surfaces, sometimes the acrylic paint, which is water-based, will bead up, and lightly sanding the surface with a fine grit sandpaper, this is 400 grit, will give the paint something to stick to and can help stop the paint from beading up. For wood or paper craft projects, gesso, which we'll talk about in a minute in a little more detail, can be used for the base coat. In mixed media projects, craft acrylics can sometimes play a unique part. They're handy for adding quick color to journal pages where they will not be exposed to light on a regular basis, so the light fastness won't be an issue. And I like to spread the paint on as a base coat in kind of a quick and dirty fashion with either something like an old plastic gift card or an old credit card or something like that. And I'm going to show you. Sometimes I also get my book open here from the hardware store. Use paint spatulas like this. Spread it around. And what I do, I just take my paint. Let me stick a pencil on my page while I'm working, or this right here. The camera doesn't want to stay in focus. Okay. I squirt my paint right on the page. Okay. This one's almost gone. Ooh, this one's nasty and thick, but that's okay. And just spread it like that. When you get goobers in your paint, I just call those goobers. Oh, spread it around a little. Just give my paint a quick background. Let's get the goober out. There we go. And this is pretty thin paper in this book, and it's going to buckle. But in my art journals, I just don't care. I like them when they get all buckly and thick and looks like they're alive and full of wonderment. Okay, so I just use that, spread it on there as a background. Just clean my spatula off real quick. It really doesn't usually get much more of a cleaning than that. Okay, that needs to dry for a second, and as I was sitting here working on this, I realized the reason that's such a different color, even though it's a higher quality paint, is because I used the wrong paint. So I used Naphthalene Crimson in a acrylic artist paint when I did the sample. I used the wrong one just now when I showed it to you on camera. So let me fix that real quick. So camera to focus. This is Naphthalene Crimson in a thicker one. Okay. Just put that right here. You see that's much closer in color now to my original dry sample. There we go. So that'll change a little bit, but it's not nearly as distinct as when I used the wrong color. Since the craft paint has a matte finish, I can write on it when it's dry. This is almost dry now. It dries pretty fast when you spray it like this. Since the matte craft paint has a matte finish, I can write and draw on it with gel pens pretty easily when it is thoroughly dry. It's not quite thoroughly dry here. So we'll let that dry just a second. I'll show you those in a minute. And Permanent markers also work well on the craft painted pages. But you have to be careful not to use your expensive ones. Don't use your good Copic markers on this, because acrylic paints are dissolved by alcohol, which is the solvent often found in permanent type markers, and writing on top of the dried paint can pick up some of the paint and gum up the marker. I use Sharpies to do this. Let's draw a quick little flower. Okay. And writing on top of the paint can sometimes pick up some of the paint and gum up the marker a little bit. It's not doing it here. I also use some cheap store brand metallic ones sometimes. I'll show you what they look like. Depends on if you can find them where you are. But they work well on top of the craft paint. I'm just doodling here. And the gel pens. That metallic one I put down is actually dark green, but the light's reflecting off of it, making it look white on the video. Okay, there's some gel pen. Those all work really well. Right on top of that dried acrylic paint. Sometimes, like when the markers do get clogged up, but they're pretty hardy, and if I wipe the tip off and let the marker rest for a couple days, it usually comes back to life pretty well. The craft paints also work well. Let's see if this is dry enough for me to close. Yep. Wipe my hand off. I made myself a mess there. The craft paints also work pretty well to combine with some other art supplies. Like water-soluble crayons, water-soluble pencils, and pastels. You can do these techniques with the higher grade paints, like the golden liquids, but I found that they work better with the more matte finish of the craft paints. And I'm less concerned with the lower pigment quality and low light fastness of the craft paints in this situation, because I'm usually using white or a lightly tinted color, relying on the higher quality pigments of the other media. Like in this case, I'm using water-soluble crayons, and these are a good artist quality pigment in there. And then they're going to mix together, and most of the color is going to come from the water-soluble crayons. So we get these open. I'm just going to do a super quick heart here. You can do things obviously much more detailed than this, but I just want a quick demonstration here. I'm doing this on a scrap of acrylic paper. You can also, for this, you could use gesso paper. Might be able to do it on canvas. You could do it on canvas board. Stretched canvas might be a little hard because you wouldn't have any surface to work back from. Okay, I'm just going to get a little squirt of my white paint on my disposable palette here. Okay, I'm going to start, put my paint in the blank area first. See, as I hit the pigment, it smears and starts to blend it together. pick that up. Bring it up closer. Okay, so it's acrylics with water-soluble crayons. This is on acrylic paper. Like I said, you can use any substrate that's hard enough that accepts your acrylic and gives you enough resistance to draw on with the crayons. It works almost identically when you use it with watercolor pencils. You can also do that with pastels, and it works very similarly. Well, pastels are dry, so you might need to use a little bit more paint.